that is just we've had the kickoff meeting. We haven't even got that ball rolling yet.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, if I was to suggest maybe an avenue of doing some investigation is not so much on the policy piece, but maybe in the engagement piece and looking at what are some innovative ways that maybe the city has not investigated on how we can meaningfully engage with our Indigenous communities. Um, yeah, so that was maybe an idea that I had there. Um, I did have a couple of little bits of feedback in regards to some of the points that you raised about, especially about making certain things public, um, because there is a lot of really important, culturally significant areas in, well, essentially all of New West is a
Right.
culturally significant area for the Indigenous communities that live here. And there is a lot of really sensitive, spiritual, culturally important areas in the city, and we have to be very, very careful in how we deal with those areas and how we discuss that with the Indigenous communities and how we discuss that in the wider community, because the vast majority of the archaeological information that we do have, we cannot really make public. So that was just something else that I thought to bring up as well, is that I
Mhm.
get where you were going with that piece about sharing information and making things public to, the community and to development organizations and things like that. But we have to be very sensitive about what information we do make public, and most of it we cannot. So the archaeological data that is available, um, we don't we don't have that data piece really on our site. It's it's actually the archaeological stuff is kind of developed by a different entity. We have information that we can access, but it's not something that we would put in our open data. There's some pretty significant rules around doing that.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to kind of address that piece. Yeah. So those are just a couple points that I wanted to raise. George, are you ready to step in?
Yes. So I do agree with everything you just said, Megan. I think the policy part of it, I think, as you mentioned, we're just in the process of kickstarting the archaeological overview assessment with in New West, and what we're looking to do is for certain types of projects, mainly when it comes to capital projects, city operations and maintenance projects, that we want to have a process mapped up in terms of um, you know how do we engage indigenous nations at the very onset of whether it's capital or operations and maintenance, just have some sort of policy in terms of um, first of all, where are all the high potential sites across the city, and if we're going to be doing any work within the vicinity of this high potential sites, um, how do we go ahead with that? Whether it's a major capital project or whether it's just an operation, your typical routine operations and maintenance project. So that's something that we're going to be doing in the next little bit. Um, I did want to mention that add on to what Megan just talked about with respect to the open data part of it. Um, Typically, that type of information, like for example, if I can just kind of give you a synopsis of what happens anytime we begin a major project, like the West End Sewer Separation Project. We consult with the nations um, at the very onset of the project. We do an archaeological overview assessment, and that Um, uh, and that's different from the citywide archaeological overview assessment that we're doing at the moment. For any major project, we have to do an AOA anyways. That's kind of the new um, undertaking that the city is moving forward with. So with the West End project, we did an AOA, and part of the AOA is just identifying like where your high potential sites and where your low potential sites. So what I wanted to say about the open data piece is even getting that information requires an archaeological consultant um, to essentially go into the provincial database. Only an archaeological consultant can do this, by the way. Go into the provincial database, um, do their investigations, do their study, do almost like a desktop study of the sites in the area and whatnot, and then based on that information, they can relay some of those concerns or what they find to the city and to the First Nations, etc. I guess the point I'm making is um, we don't even have access to a lot of that information, and the only people who can actually get that access is actually like professional. What do they call the professionals that do this type of work? Um, yeah,
Like the archaeologist, you mean, or
yeah,
which? Yeah,
like the professional archaeology, like they have to
yeah.
be certified
Right.
to actually go in and find this information. So it's really difficult to have some sort of open data platform where we can have this type of information. I think there's certain aspects to it, like when, for example, when you're talking about some other cultural and heritage information, for example, across the city, we have heritage buildings and heritage neighborhoods and certain aspects of a lot of heritage aspects with respect to development across the city that I don't think we have mapped out very well to say, but that to me that's more in the public realm. Like that type of information. But when you're talking about more cultural, like finds and sensitive stuff, I don't think we would have any access to that. Um, so yeah, I just wanted to touch on that piece, and then I also want to touch a little bit on the development side of it because I thought I saw that as part of your project brief, which is, we don't really touch on the private side of things. So we sort of regulate that through our development services department. But in terms of actually being able to spell out the processes of what should happen for archaeological assessments and what in private land, we don't really venture into that realm. That's more so left out to the development community and how the province wants to kind of handle that. We don't want to step into that. So we're mostly um, we're looking at capital operations maintenance on city right of way on city lands uh, essentially. So anyways, just wanted to provide that. Anything else you want to add, Megan?
Yeah, I guess I would just say I'm trying to again formulate some of the thoughts that I had at our last meeting, and I should have written them down, but I see that I didn't. Um, I think what I would really maybe hope to see in terms of some of like the innovative ideas that could be generated from this project is in addition to how we engage with the Indigenous communities. And I hope you saw that I put some resources in the chat as well. I'm not sure if you were familiar with the city's proclamation of 2024 being the Year of Truth. And if you haven't read the information on the website, theyearofTruth.ca, I would encourage you to do so, as well as just there was the brief there about the city proclaiming the Year of Truth as part of Truth and Reconciliation. But I think what I would really like to see is maybe some ideas generation around the engagement process with the Indigenous communities, but also how how they can be meaningfully included in capital projects. I think like going beyond the engagement piece with, and correct me if I'm wrong, George, with especially with the scale of some of the capital projects like the West End sewer separation,
Mhm.
is there is the opportunity there where, if we're tearing up massive amounts of like street or infrastructure and things like that. I mean, obviously that has to be put back into place, but when that is put back into place, how can we incorporate the the histories and the presence of not only historical nations and the communities there, but the people that still reside here, and for whom these places are not just city infrastructure. They're not just part of like the gray of infrastructure of the city, but how can traditional indigenous knowledge be incorporated into what we do as part of these capital projects? How can we include the public in having more information about the original residents of the city, and
Mhm.
spitballing crazy ideas, but like how do we include like ethnobotany or information placards for the public about, hey, this is what was here originally, just kind of things like that. So I'm again, don't be afraid to be like pie in the sky on some things too. I mean, yeah, we would like to see things that could be like meaningfully implemented, but I really like the idea of kind of thinking outside the box, and how the city can be very kind of bureaucratic in the way that we do things. I mean, that's obvious. That's kind of what a city does, but I mean, we have to walk the walk and not just talk the talk on truth and reconciliation. And I think that the policy and the formal engagement piece is kind of what we have to do, but how can we do more, and how can it be more meaningful and more placemaking for Indigenous communities, kind of above and beyond like what we're already doing.
That's a really good point, Megan. How can we sort of incorporate that with capital projects? Um,
Can I ask a question about because I really like that idea and it kind of brings up a lot of different thoughts immediately, but
mm,
I think initially, just to clarify what you mean by that, because I did a project last semester about kind of like hydroelectric dams in BC. And part of the project that I looked into a little bit was the fact that like Indigenous nations were kind of almost like um, they kind of had their own, they were able to gain capital from certain dams that they owned. But then I also know that in the brief that we read, you guys have managed to cut down costs by, or are trying to cut down costs by using like one specific contractor, at least for like most of it. So I assume that like also that type of integration is like above what we are working on. But if you guys could just clarify a little bit more what you mean by capital projects. Like, is it more like capital projects that you guys are spending money on, but then how do you incorporate them into that? Or um, like, how do you kind of encourage capital accumulation within Indigenous nations in partnership with the city? Like, if that makes sense, what I'm asking.
yeah. So yes, the capital projects would essentially be, all the projects that the city undertakes.
Mhm.
So in on either city um, city property or city right of way that typically have a certain value to them. I think it's over like $100,000,
Mhm.
and um, it has to be approved as, part of the 5-year financial plan,
Mhm.
capital budget. So anything from just our typical renewal, rehabs, replacements of existing infrastructure, like, water main, sewers, roads, et cetera, et cetera. Um, so there's a capital project that really kind of deal with renewals over a certain threshold. And then you have the operations and maintenance projects. That's just kind of your daily routine, um, operating of existing infrastructure and just kind of doing your proactive and preventative and reactive type of maintenance if things are breaking or things are need repairs, etc., etc. Um, so so I hope that kind of answers the question about capital projects. Um, Now, just to add on to what Megan said, I remember, I think maybe it's about 10 years ago. Quite frankly, I don't know if this still actually exists at the city, but a certain amount of the capital budget, capital projects, I think it's 1% or something, used to go back to arts and culture as a way to kind of promote what Megan was talking about, to kind of um, almost kind of give back to the community that are being impacted by this particular project by trying to uh, promote the arts and promote culture and different aspects of it. I wonder if um, that is something that we could look at for more heritage, like, First Nation, Indigenous type of aspects, like in terms of trying to promote that a little bit more in these communities that we're impacting, where maybe a certain amount of the capital project budget will go towards that. Um, or maybe it's already part of that 1%, like the arts and culture, but maybe to zoom in more on the indigenous part of it. And what do you think, Megan? I mean, it's something that quite frankly, I don't know how that still works anymore. It might be something that's just a line item in the city's capital budget and it's been completely forgotten about, right?
Yeah, I'd have to review the
Mm.
budget to see if it's actually itemized in there. And I also did throw into the chat the link to the city's 2023 budget information and
Mhm.
also the council report, but the draft of the 2024 to 2028 budget, I think it was.
Mhm.
Yeah, the 5-year financial plan. Um, and there's some budget information in there. I'm not sure if you folks attended the council meeting when they were discussing the budget. I think that was it last week or the week before?
The week before.
Week before. And
Yeah.
did you attend that one?
No, fortunately not that one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
If I think that they may have,
Yeah,
I
they
can
have
check.
recordings, I think.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
that might be also it's not like I'll be honest, it's not super exciting stuff. I
Yeah.
don't blame you for not listening to it, but I mean also it could have value if it's something that you wanted to listen to as well when they discuss the budget. It's probably not they're going to go they don't go through every single line item. But I
Mhm.
mean it is something that they do, I mean just capital works and stuff like that is discussed as part of the budget. So it might be of value to review that as well. But yeah, I think coming back to your point, George, I mean that's definitely something that bears investigation on whether that's something that is still done, or is there something, if not done, something similar that can be looked at, or some other method of putting money back into um, that arts and culture sort of bucket.
Mhm.
Mm.
And specifically zooming in on the indigenous piece too.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
for sure.
Right. I do. Again, like running back to a point earlier, I was really interested, like, because like when we were writing our project brief, I came across the entire like open data set that New West publishes for some of their projects. I was just wondering, would you be able to shed some light on like what the protocol for releasing data like that is?
Um, like releasing, like putting up data in the open data, you mean? Or
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah, putting up data or putting up data in the open data. Yeah.
Um, it's a good question, and unfortunately, I don't think I'm the right person to answer it. I think you probably have to go through our record keeping, like our records and information division of the city, who are kind of responsible for, all the privacy, making sure that the city kind of abides with all the different privacy and laws and FOIs and all that kind of stuff. I'm pretty sure there's some sort of protocol out that we can provide. I just don't think I'm the right person to answer that, but
Right.
it's a good question, and I think we can follow up on that. Because
Hmm.
like I think you're right. Why is some information public and some other information not as public, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you don't know now, if you think of the right person for me to bug, that would be
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah. I'll look into that. I think it's a corporate records office. Whoever's leading that right now. I think that's Jackie. Jacqueline just left. Jacqueline.
We the lady that would have probably been the best person in contact just recently left the city, so there we have
Mm.
somebody kind of in an acting role at the moment. So yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay, that's unfortunate.
It would take some
Mm.
hunting, I think, probably to find. I guess my question would be, um, like, to what end would this information be beneficial for you guys in knowing what our protocols are? Like, where just kind of like talk me through your thought process on like how that kind of matters to you guys and why why you would want to know what the protocols are. Not that I'm like, no, can't know, but just kind of like want to know what your thought process is on that.
Right. Personally, like, and kind of like, kind of related to my the project brief that we put up was kind of like the access of information, being all important. A lot of people don't know about, FOIs, or like even that they exist or how to make requests of them. And I know that federally there's like a big source dump of, like, which like documents federally, provincially, you can handle and get, and there's like a searchable database done by like a I'm not too sure, but it's one of the big news organizations. And like, just like an idea that's kind of popped in my head recently was like, maybe like simplifying like requests of data pertaining to like maybe certain aspects that are like important to people. I'm not too sure. It's just like a burgeoning idea that's kind of thrown around in my head, but it's just like might be like an important aspect that might help our project in the future, I think.
Hmm.
And how would that tie back to the kind of like the indigenous like engagement piece and things like that?
Mm. I think in terms of like an engagement piece for Indigenous relations, um, beyond the face value of here's information that might interest you, I'm not well versed in Indigenous relations, so I can't like say what value it might hold for them. But I know, generally speaking, information has an inherent value which people will always be looking for. So, what specific value holds for them, that's something I have to hunt down during the course of my project if it comes to that.
I think,
So yeah, go
sorry,
ahead,
go
sorry.
ahead, Joyce.
No,
Well, I
no.
was just gonna say,
Yeah.
I think that the way that I was looking at it previously was if we're my original idea with that, or like both of ours, like, I don't want to speak for you, but like I think my general understanding of our project was more to kind of try to kind of showcase the relationship between Indigenous nations and the city of New West. And I think that currently the way that I'm looking at it is trying to, just based on what you guys have said, specifically on like what is accessible information that you guys even have access to. It seems as though kind of trying to pivot that idea a little bit would be beneficial. And so yeah, I've been kind of, I'm quite interested with looking into how we could try to meaningfully include Indigenous communities or nations in capital projects. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
I think that that's a really like to me, like that's a good starting point for us to kind of continue to brainstorm ideas with.
Mhm.
Um, and I think we can like either revisit previous ideas that we had in mind or just try and come up with new ones. But
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
think,
I think that's a good plan. Um, Not that I'm saying the information part of it is not a good idea. I think it is, Gordon. I think the way I would describe it is just we're on, we just declared the year of truth last year. Um, so we're at the beginning of our journey with meaningful like reconciliation and and part of that meaningful reconciliation is actually collecting such information that could be meaningful to the public and whatnot. And over time and being able to record that properly because I'm not sure we've done that in the past like properly. And quite frankly, I don't know how much information we actually would have in the first place.
I,
Uh, but I think that's more on a corporate level. And there's the city staff that actually can probably talk about that more than I can. Um, and and I think that's kind of outside of your intent with your project brief. I think it's more very high level corporate type of stuff.
Right.
um,
Mhm.
just so we did this past week, we went to the archives with our class and we spoke with, I believe her name was possibly Megan. I actually don't know.
Okay.
But she had been the one who was working with the city archives and
Mhm.
also I think she provided a whole like presentation for the city about um, the like based on council meeting minutes, what had like how the city like the historical relations with the city and different indigenous nations or kind of like indigeneity as a whole. And so I guess I'm kind of curious if there's a way like if that information is allowed to be publicized if it isn't already. Just like those like kind of historical, like I'm just trying to think of different ways that which obviously Gordon and I have to kind of have a meeting and talk about this now that we have a little more kind of guidance with where you guys see us fitting in. But um just like I think that possibly ideas of like both placemaking within um the city of New West through the use of capital projects and also trying to like situate or tie this relationship with indigenous nations to the city of New West. Like that's kind of like what I'm trying to kind of like see if there's something that kind of like brings all three of those together in a way. And I guess I'm wondering if that information is allowed to be publicized or if it's more something that is just kind of like within the city. This is kind of the relations we've had and how it's shaped the year of truth outcome.
Well, I would, if I could jump in, I would really recommend that before answering that, that you do take a look at the Year of Truth website, because I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of information or a lot of the questions that you might have would probably be answered within that page. Because, um, I am, I'm proud to say that the City of New West is doing a lot more than most municipalities are
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to reconciliation with our Indigenous
Mm-hmm.
communities. Um, so I would maybe defer to just taking a look at that site first before
Mm-hmm.
kind of like answering that question specifically, because I think that that is a really good resource to see what kind of information is already public and what kind of information that we do make public, because it's a public website, anybody can access it. So I think that's
Mm-hmm.
probably a good place to start. The other thing I might add is, just kind of, again, formulating some thoughts on this is that I would be curious to know, what if any other municipalities or any other cities like in North America, if they are doing anything in terms of incorporating reconciliation into their capital projects. Um, yeah, because that's something that, I don't know if we're exploring as, are there cities that are already doing this so we could take some lessons from? Um,
Well, I think a lot of this idea for what we're doing actually came from looking at what other folks are doing, and I think specifically we zoomed into Port Moody.
yeah, and yeah, because I'm kind of touching on some of the coursework that I'm doing also.
Oh, I see.
So because I'm in an environmental planning course, and there's like a
Okay.
lot to do with this kind of stuff in this area as
Okay.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, Port Moody for sure. This like the city of Vancouver is doing quite a lot too, obviously, and there's as I'm sure you know, George. I mean, because some of it impacts us too. There's not necessarily just through the city of Vancouver, but in Metro Vancouver. But the
Metro,
city of Vancouver,
Metro Vancouver is doing a lot.
Yeah.
yes, but the
And
city of
in
Vancouver,
fact, yeah, sorry, go
yeah.
ahead, Megan.
No,
Yeah.
no, 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 keep going. But yeah, the city of Vancouver specifically also is doing a lot. But I mean, it might be worthwhile taking a look. And I wouldn't necessarily limit yourself to this particular region because, I mean, there's indigenous communities all over North America. We have a very strong concentration here in BC, but all along the western, like Pacific Northwest coast and things like that. I mean, it might be worthwhile to see if there's any other cities that what they might be doing on the reconciliation piece as it ties into capital projects. But coming back to your point, Gordon, and I do, I see value in the information piece, and there can be a lot of, I don't want to term it as secrecy, but like maybe lack of transparency around capital projects, maybe because a lot of it's not really super exciting stuff, but that could be something to look at too as part of the reconciliation piece is yes, we have a duty to consult and engage with indigenous communities, but what more can be done beyond that to involve the indigenous communities in capital projects as part of reconciliation. It's going above and beyond just the bare minimum, and what other things can we be doing that we maybe are not doing, and part of that might be an information piece. I mean, we have a duty to share information with the nations, but is there more that we could be sharing with them? Is there more that could be made public that maybe the public would be interested in knowing about?
So, yeah, that's a very all good points. A couple of things I want to add on to that, especially when you talked about, what other folks are doing, not just, in Canada, I guess also in the States and whatnot. Um, how familiar are you guys with the latest legislation that's come through from the feds and the province? So one is the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, and the other one is the BC DRIPR, DRIPR Act. I don't know how familiar you are with the BC one, because there's also a lot of work that they're trying to do on that end as well. And a lot of that work might be parallel to what I think you guys are trying to explore at the same time, like in terms of um, how to better engage with First Nations and to to then be able to communicate with the public and one. I think it might be useful to maybe visit the BC website as well and really look at what they're trying to do on that specific legislation in terms of their action plans. I know there's like four or five key areas that they're really looking into. Um, and maybe you might be able to find some good information there as well. Now, I want to go back to Zoe. You said something about a council report that went out at some point that had a bunch of information.
I don't know if it was a council report, but it was like I think it was presented to council
Okay.
as a report that was just about the relations, but or
Okay,
from my
so
understanding.
if it was in if it was presented to council in like an open council, then it will be a public report to begin with.
Hmm.
So all you'd have to do is find the public report.
It
Hmm.
was the West End sewer separation project
Oh,
that
oh, is
we,
that the one?
yeah, that was the one.
Okay. Okay. I mean, yeah, if it is a public, if it was presented to council in public, then it is a public report. I don't think you need to ask for any more information, right? Yeah. So, yeah. Anyways, that's the points I wanted to make. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, I think that's kind of on my end at least given me some like understanding and definitely some guidance on where to keep kind of looking. And I don't know if Gordon, if you have anything else that you kind of are curious about exploring.
hmm it's a lot to chew on, so probably gonna need some time to digest that.
Mhm.
Yeah, we got a lot of good information and a lot more direction than we've had.
Mhm.
hmm Uh,
Awesome.
yeah. All right.
Which,
Challenging
yeah,
topic.
It
Yeah.
is. Yeah.
Wish you guys luck on it.
no,
It's
I
a
really
lot.
appreciate it.
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah, because one of the biggest things that the biggest roadblocks we had before this meeting was, you know, this is like a sewer separation rehabilitation project, and we were like, what, where the hell do we fit in? And like, how did this like kind of like, what are the like intricacies? Because like we didn't have much of context coming in, so it was very helpful.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie to you, it's kind of new, it's a new realm for us as well,
hmm
right? I mean, we're just in the beginning to develop an actual policy for across the city, and we made sure that we made this project um sort of like a blueprint for how we're gonna do things in the future.
Right.
Mhm.
Because it's a major project, it's a major, massive project in terms of,
Mhm.
New West dollars, it's $10 million. Or actually more than that, $20 million, but it's not major for Metro Vancouver. That's like a drop in the bucket for them.
hmm
And um, so for us, this was something that we wanted to use as a blueprint, as if we're doing major capital projects like this is how we want to engage the nations. This is the different um, processes and studies that we want to do, et cetera, et
Right.
cetera. And the one thing I want to mention as well is that there already is some processes out there in terms of how the regulations work when it comes to the provincial regulations. I think it'll be worthwhile to dig into, now that we're talking in the context of this particular project, this West End, just to do a little research in terms of what an archaeological overview assessment is, what an archaeological impact assessment is. Um, because one of the things, because this is something that we are also kind of subject to. The city is actually subject to this regulations, to this process. So we have to do an AOA, and then if the nations determine that there's more cultural significance or more heritage than what the archaeological overview assessment is saying, which is what ended up happening with this West End project, they can request that we do an archaeological impact assessment, which is a much more detailed type of investigations into like making sure we do a lot more monitoring during construction, et cetera, et cetera. And part of that archaeological impact assessment is making sure we get permits from the province, like a heritage inspection permit from the province in order to even do this type of construction work.
And from the indigenous nations as
And
well,
and
which
from
have
the
different permitting processes for each nation that's involved
exactly.
also. Yeah.
So we actually have to get permits from all these different nations and from the province. Um, so you know, you might think we're the city, we determine how we do things. Actually, we're subject to a whole lot of different regulations from the province when it comes to this particular topic.
Oh.
So
Mhm.
so it might be something also worth zooming into and kind of learning a little bit more about.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I'm definitely interested on the like the nations like
Mhm.
giving out permits part
Yeah,
because I never came across any information about them being the ones permitting other people.
yeah, absolutely, and I think that is we can provide some context to that. Um, and Megan, would you know, and we can kind of find that
Um,
information?
Offhand, I would have to do like a little bit more investigation, but I do know that for other projects that we've done in the past, and I'm trying to think of what was one specifically for.
Even the pump
Uh,
stations that we just did, pump station
yeah,
project.
the Boundary Road Pump Station, and
Yeah.
actually, I have it right here.
That's
Oh.
right.
So yeah, it was the Musqueam Indian Band Heritage Protection Inspection Permit,
Yeah.
Tsleil-Waututh Nation Cultural Heritage Investigation Permit,
Hmm.
the Sam Heritage Investigation Permit, and the Stolo Heritage Investigation Permit. So
Yeah.
that's just
Essentially, you
that's a bite.
you have to get all those permits from First Nations in order to eventually get the final heritage inspection permit from the province.
Yeah.
Because all the different nations essentially have to give you a permit to actually kind of go ahead and do this type of investigation work.
Mhm.
It's a very interesting process, and I think part of it too is the different governance between all the different nations, because they all have different protocols and ways of doing things.
Mhm.
Yeah, and at the risk of kind of
Yeah.
being spicy, they don't always all get along together
No,
either.
yeah.
Yeah.
And they don't always want to share information amongst
Hmm.
the different nations as well. So
Yeah, that makes
that's
sense.
also a challenge.
Hmm. Yeah, that's definitely something we'll look into.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, hopefully we've not muddied the waters further for you
No,
guys on
I
this
actually
stuff.
think you guys have definitely made it a lot clearer.
Okay.
So yeah, we really appreciate your guys' guidance with this.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's tough because it's in a way it's a bit of a blank slate because as George says, it's kind of like the blueprint. So there's not a
Hmm.
lot of guidance that can be offered, but at the same time, it's a pretty good open opportunity to be innovative in how things are done because we don't
Hmm.
really have that set process at the moment. So
Hmm.
Great. Well, hopefully we can schedule another meeting once Gordon and I have kind of come up with some new ideas and we can maybe talk through them and see how they kind of land and stuff like that.
Yeah,
yeah, from my
definitely.
perspective, like don't be afraid to, if you've got an idea or whatever, just shoot me an email and George is probably a little bit busier than I am, but so I might have a little bit more time to give feedback if you shoot me an email with a question or hey, can I run this idea by you? And then I can always just pop over to George's office and see if I can bug him about it too. But yeah, so don't be afraid to reach out if you need to as well.
All right.
Great.
Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
All
You're
right.
welcome.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank
Have
you.
a
Okay.
great
All
rest of your
right.
day.
Have a
Have a
good
good
one.
Thanks. Take
day.
Okay.
care.
Bye.
Bye.
See
Bye.
you.
Oh, fuck.